So let's begin. Today's author has written 23 novels. He's won the John D. MacDonald Fiction Award and has been nominated for the Edgar McCavity International Thriller, Seamus and James Thurber Prizes. He's a former trial lawyer. Today's author also wrote 20 episodes of the CBS military drama JAG. He's written the international bestseller To Speak for the Dead was his first novel, and he introduced teachers to linebacker turned lawyer Jake Lassiter. The latest, which is Early Grave, where we have a few copies behind the counter. Today's, I'm holding a super tiny, for those with super sight, mini book of Paul's Midnight Burning. He's going to tell you about that in a little bit, but here's the regular copy. In this latest work, Midnight Burning, the author, this is by, he brings the life of two of the most beloved characters of the 20th century, real life characters. Throw out some intrigue and imagination, and you have the makings of what New York Times best-selling author Jacqueline Winspear said. Paul Levine brings the snappy humor of this terrific series to the series that makes it ingenious by pairing the real-life friends Charlie Chaplin and Albert Einstein, and takes them on a roller coaster ride to save America from a fascist threat. For that, we're dying to know. Please welcome Paul Levine.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Chaucer. Just a word of big thanks to Chaucer from all of us in this room, that you are a local cultural institution of great importance, one of the really wonderful independent bookstores in America. Let's hear it for Chaucer. Share of Instagram and TikTok. We need you. Don't go anywhere. You mentioned John D. MacDonald Award. John D. MacDonald was my favorite Florida author, wrote Travis McGee. Marna likes him. He said something that is relevant to Chaucer's and to all of us in an essay he wrote called On Reading. JDM wrote, "The person who does not read books has no advantage over the person who cannot read them." So everybody here can read books, and that's why in these events, which I've been doing for a while, I never pick up the book and say, I'm going to read to you from page 232, because I know you folks can do it. What I'd rather do is tell you a little bit about the origins of this book, since it's my first work of historical fiction after a couple dozen legal thrillers. There's a photograph on the back that some of you have seen, because you've already gotten the book, of Albert Einstein and Charlie Chaplin in tuxedos. I saw that picture over 20 years ago, and I did a little bit, tiny bit of research compared to what I did later, and learned that they were close friends. Why are they in tuxedos? Well, it's January 30th, 1931. They're walking into the Los Angeles Theater, downtown LA, for the premiere of City Lights, a Chaplin film about compassion, empathy, kindness of strangers. And the two men hit it off. They had only met earlier that week, and they became close friends. They had a lot in common, despite very different backgrounds. Einstein, of course, fled Germany when Hitler came to power, was immediately named an enemy of the state. A bounty was put on his head, something history tells us not that well known today. When he first went to Belgium and then to England, he had to have armed guards everywhere. In the German newspapers, his picture was printed with the caption, "Not dead yet." Why did they want to kill Einstein? There's no good reason. He was Jewish, and his theories of general relativity and special relativity were called Jewish propaganda, which is kind of hard to figure. Chaplin was despised by Adolf Hitler even before Chaplin wrote The Great Dictator. Does everybody here know The Great Dictator? The lampooning of both Hitler and Mussolini by Chaplin in a brilliant work of art that still holds up today. Well, Hitler called him, and I'm I want to get this right. There was a time when I didn't need notes to do this. I would remember all of this, but that time is long gone. Hitler called Chaplin a little Jewish acrobat, as disgusting as he is tedious. Correction, he wasn't Jewish, though a lot of people thought he was, and when he was asked, he said, "Sadly, I do not have that good fortune." They were both humanists. And to me, when I saw them together in this photograph and learned that they were friends, I thought, there's a movie here or there's a book here. In movie terms, it'd be a buddy picture. So I'm thinking, you know, what buddy pictures do I know? Okay, well, there's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, but they robbed banks. Didn't seem like a good setup for the two of them. Bonnie and Clyde is sort of a buddy picture. They robbed banks. And so we're still in it. Thelma and Louise is a buddy picture. They robbed a liquor store. All 6 of those people ended up dead in those particular movies, so that wasn't going to work. I had no story. And this is around 2002, 2003 when I first saw the photo. I was working in television. As Michael said, I worked on JAG, and in this particular year, I was on a show called First Monday, which I co-created with Don Belisario, and which was in the process of being canceled. So I was going back to being a novelist, and I was going to start a new series, which I did, called Solomon versus Lord, which is legal thrillers, legal capers. No room for Einstein and Chaplin, and I had no story. So what I'm talking about today is where the story came from. And it took another 15 years. I'm going to shift my weight here. I feel like I should have a guitar. And we could have a hootenanny. There are some people here old enough to remember what a hootenanny is. Looking at you, Jeff. Say no. Okay, that's more comfortable. No guitar. In, I believe, 2017, a professor from USC named Steve Ross wrote a book called Hitler in Los Angeles, nonfiction. And I learned a lot that perhaps I should have known, but I didn't know at the time. There was a very virulent fascist movement in the United States from coast to coast. That I knew. I didn't know the specifics. A lot of people here have probably seen the video of the Madison Square Garden fascist rally. John is shaking his head, yes, with 20,000 Americans saluting Sieg Heil to photographs, posters of Adolf Hitler. The German-American Bund, which started as a German-American friendship society, but ended up as a fascist movement. The Silver Legion of America on the West Coast, led by a man named William Dudley Pelley, who plays a large role in this book, sought to overthrow the U.S. government, if you can imagine. If you can imagine a fascist movement. In addition to that, or as part of that, their plan was to rob U.S. armories with the help of some people in the U.S. Army of machine guns, ammunition, grenades, rifles, and begin with an assassination plot of about 24 Hollywood figures. I don't know why. They called it Operation Hollywood. Most of the Hollywood figures were Jewish, moguls. One was Charlie Chaplin. And now when I read that in Steve Ross's book, I go, oh, I think I see a story is starting to form. Einstein and Chaplin are going to have to take on the fascists. Now, credibility is always an issue in fiction. Can these two guys, one's 48, one's 58, they're not exactly athletes, they're not superheroes, this is not Iron Man. They needed a third person, and I wanted it to be a real person. And I recruited Sergeant Georgia Ann Robinson, a real life hero, the first black woman on the LAPD, who suffered all kinds of discrimination on her rise in the LAPD, which was a thoroughly corrupt organization led by a guy, and you couldn't make this up, Ed Two Gun Davis. And Two Gun had ownership interest in an estimated 400 brothels in LA County, was on the take from bookie joints, was part and supported by the Ku Klux Klan, and he's the guy, the architect of the bum blockade, the blatantly unconstitutional. If you can imagine anybody in the justice system doing anything unconstitutional, I know it defies all belief. If you can imagine setting up blockades at the California, Arizona, and California, Nevada borders to keep out people who didn't have money. The people who were derided as Okies, who had come from Oklahoma, Arkansas, other places in the Midwest during the Depression, during the Dust Bowl, were turned away at the border until the courts stopped it. The courts used to stop unconstitutional things. I'm just saying, little side note. So, Two Gun Davis had no interest whatsoever in ferreting out Los Angeles-based paramilitary fascist organizations. Neither did J. Edgar Hoover, who was too busy chasing communists looking under every bed, and wanted to root communists out of Los Angeles, not fascists. So I had my trailblazing female cop, my genius and my tramp, and those are my three protagonists. Now, lest this story sound a little grim of assassination plots and paramilitary, in pretty much all of my books, whether they're legal thrillers or now historical fiction, I do try to lighten the mood a little bit. In this book, I have Chaplin in his beautiful Phantom II Rolls-Royce convertible. Ray, you probably have one.
Very nice.
With a custom red racing stripe on the side. They drive down to Wrigley Field, not in Chicago, but Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, for a game between the Los Angeles Angels and the San Diego Padres. And no, I'm not getting my decades mixed up. That's what the teams were called in the Pacific Coast League. So I'm going to have a plot point in the scene. I don't want to give away too much. But there's an attempted murder in the scene. But I thought I could have some fun if Einstein had never seen a baseball game. So on the way, they're in the car, they're going down through South LA. And Chaplin says, Albert, do you know anything about American baseball? Oh, Charlie, I know a lot. I know baseball is as American as apple strudel. They go to the game, some things are happening. They run into people who really did attend those games. The gangster Bugsy Siegel, William Randolph Hearst and Marion Davies, Bob Hope. Other people, we have some interchanges with them. Bob Hope says to Einstein, "Professor, I'm reading a book about anti-gravity and I can't put it down." Einstein says, "I never heard of that book." They're in the 8th inning, it's a 1-0 game. Chaplin says to his friend, "Albert, so what do you think of baseball?" And Einstein says, "To tell you the truth, Charlie, it's like waiting for uranium-238 to decay." Chaplin said, I don't know what you're talking about. Einstein said, "It takes 4.5 billion years," which is what some of us think about baseball, even with the pitch clock these days. Einstein had a great sense of humor. I can't take credit for this next line because he really said it more than once. In the book, Georgianne Robinson has a daughter, which she did in real life, and she's doing her homework as the three of them, Robinson, Chaplin, and Einstein, are planning how they're going to take on the fascist groups. And the little girl asks Einstein a question and then says to him, he helps her with her homework, "I'll bet you got nothing but A's when you were in school." And Einstein says, as he did in real life, "To tell you the truth, darling, as a student, I was no Einstein." really reflected a lot about it. So I don't want to tell you too much about the story because I want you to read the story and get all of that stuff. But I will say this, in looking at it from a distance, the early reviews, the trade publication reviews, have a common notion that runs through them, and that is that unfortunately this book is timely. Now, what do I think about that? Do I ever say anything in this book? Do I get on a soapbox and say, here is my theme? That, John, no, that would be bad writing, right? You don't say, this is my theme. Theme should come out of subtext, I think. Theme should be interpreted by the reader and can be interpreted in many different ways. It may not be what I'm thinking or what I intended. But if you forced me to tell you what the subtext is, what the theme is, I would probably say something like this. Democracy is not a given. 200 years or 250 years of democracy does not mean there will be 300 or 350 years of democracy. And to sum it up in one sentence, the struggle between democracy and tyranny never ends. And we must be alert to that. And that's kind of what the book is about on the surface and what I think it's about under the surface thematically. And I want to take questions because I often find that the questions are more interesting than anything that I have to say. Yeah.
When you write fiction, you're making it up, you're in your own world. When you wrote this book, you had to adhere to certain givens because these characters were real. Did that, number one, make it more difficult to write? And was it less fun because you could just be in your own world making things up? And was it harder because you had to do a lot of research?
Okay, if you didn't hear that in the back, was it harder to write because you're dealing with real people, real events, limiting imagination? Is it less fun than making everything up? The fun part to me is when I'm done with the book. But yes, you are constrained. We know that in real life, Einstein and Chaplin did not end up on a fascist ranch in the Santa Monica Mountains where there's a stockpile of machine guns in a barn. We know that didn't happen. You get to that point in the book. Hopefully, I have laid enough factual background and credible fiction that you're going to go for that ride, which is near the end of the book. The research, which I didn't talk about, caught me a little bit by surprise. You would say, well, how could you not know that if you're going to write a book set in 1937? It's set in the first week of May 1937 for a reason, and that is at the end of that week, the Hindenburg, which plays a plot point, comes from Germany to Lakehurst, New Jersey. Spoiler alert, the landing doesn't go well. It just doesn't go well. Yeah, I had to get so many little things right. Like, what car did Charlie Chaplin drive? What kind of stockings did women wear? What cigarettes did people smoke? What is a Hupmobile? It was a lot of work, and I would constantly try to find 2 or 3 or 4 sources to back up some historical fact that I might find on the internet, which may or may not be true. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's
Did you have to engage with the estates of Einstein and Chaplin? Did they have any kind of request to read what you were writing or anything?
I have heard from the estate of Charlie Chaplin with a cease and desist letter about our trailer, which uses some clips that they think you have to pay for, and I insist, as a former lawyer, though not a copyright lawyer, it's absolutely fair use. I haven't heard from the Einstein estate.
Yeah.
Anything, yes.
How did you find out about your female policewoman, and where did you do the research about her? Or has a book been written about her life?
I couldn't find a book, but there is a lot in, when Black History Month comes around, she's frequently, her bio is frequently in there. I can't remember exactly where it started. There is, if you want to read about the real Georgianne Robinson, there is an article on Wikipedia, and it's pretty complete. She and her husband were very early in the NAACP, and she started something called the Sojourner's Home, which was a rescue place for, or shelter for women who had suffered abuse. She was a towering figure at a time when it was really difficult to do what she did.
Spoiler alert, I read it. It's really, really good. I endorse it. But the question I have for you is what's you thinking about? Are you going to move on with these, or you have something else? What do you have in mind? Because I know you probably already know.
Well, I may have already written book 2. Again, this is May 1937, this book. The next book starts on October 31, Halloween 1940, which was the premiere of The Great Dictator, which really put Chaplin in the crosshairs of Nazi assassins. But the book opens, I'll give you a spoiler alert for the second book, the first chapter, because you'll forget it by the time the book is out. But the book begins with Charlie Chaplin in bed with Marion Davies, who was William Randolph Hearst's mistress, but in real life carried on with Chaplin for about 20 years.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Jill, does that like upset you or something?
No, my question is, so who are you casting in the movie?
Your mouth to Spielberg's ears. We don't have a movie deal yet, but thank you.
But I want to know who you would cast.
Well,
Have you thought about it?
no, I have, but I had one to say.
All right, you
Let me
wanna take
finish
it.
with this.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Okay,
I drew you into it.
Sorry.
So Chaplin's in bed with Marion Davies. Einstein is in bed. It's a double suite at the Waldorf with a woman named Margarita Kornikova, who he did have an affair with after Einstein's wife had died. But Kornikova's husband was a famous sculptor named Sergei, whose bust of Einstein is in Princeton at the Institute for Advanced Study, and while he was doing the bust of Einstein was sleeping with his wife. I'm sorry, but it happened. It was 1940, it's a different time. All right, here's the hotel suite. I'll tell the whole story now. Somebody breaks into the hotel suite, and it's the gangster Mickey Cohen, who has been hired by William Randolph Hearst, who promises Mickey Cohen, and the second part of this is true, that if he shoots Chaplin, he'll get his own reporter to follow him around to the clubs that he owns on the Sunset Strip. Now, he didn't, in real life, he didn't hire him to shoot it, but he did give him a reporter for other reasons. And that's the first chapter of the second book. It's a little bit of hijinks going on in a double suite at the Waldorf. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, I just had a question from a writerly point of view. We've often talked about writing a first draft, how difficult it is, and then as you do the second, the third, the fourth, the sixth, whatever, it becomes a little easier. I'm sure the joy comes in as opposed to like how to put it all together. I'm only in the first 50 pages, but I'm kind of enchanted and entranced by how you structure, how you divide the chapters and different points of view, getting into, I'm sure, a very interesting mix. I mean, that's a question of beginning of a novel or a historical novel. Was that difficult to make that decision about how to structure it?
Well, I start with the proposition that every story has a 3-act structure that comes down to us from Aristotle. I used to know the names of the 3 acts in Greek, but I don't anymore. But in television, they used to say, in Act 1, you put your hero in a tree. In Act 2, you throw rocks at your hero. In Act 3, you bring the hero down, or he falls down and breaks his head. It's a sad ending. So I'd like to know, before I start, where does Act 1 end? Where do we know what the quest is of the hero and what the antagonist has in mind for the hero. What complications would there be for the hero or heroes, in this case, 3 of them. Act 2 are the complications. The end of Act 2, the heroes are at their lowest point, and in Act 3 they either prevail or they don't. But that's would be my usual starting point. Anything else before I got my guitar out and finish this with a band?
How much of the next version have you written, the next part of the story?
All of it.
All of it? That's good.
Yes, yes. And I'll only say this about the second book too. I don't know why. The entire second half of the book takes place on the Santa Fe Super Chief from Chicago to Los Angeles in 39 hours, which is faster than you can go by train today, but you could in 1940. And on that train are Chaplin and Einstein, a real Nazi spy named Fritz Duquesne, a couple of FBI agents, Mickey Cohen, and Lena Horne.
Well, who was more fun or harder to write, Chaplin or Einstein?
That's a great question. And I think Chaplin was harder to write. He didn't give a lot of himself away. And even in his autobiography, which of course I read, he wasn't easy to pin down on a lot of things. He was, well, Einstein, he was a genius. I mean, you know, he wrote every single one of his movies. He starred in every single one of his movies. He produced them, he directed them, he composed the music for them, though he had no musical training, and he distributed them through the company he owned with Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, which we call United Artists. He was unbelievable, but not that knowable.
One more question. Does anybody have? Oh, I'll ask you.
Yes, Michael.
When you write a book like your Jake Lasseter series, obviously it's all fiction, and then this has, you have to effectively interweave fiction and nonfiction together. Do you approach it differently when you write the Jake Lasseter as opposed to this novel, or do you kind of go through the same process you would, other than the actual research?
Well, as Neil implied, there's a lot more freedom in books that are fiction, and yet, if I'm going to do a murder trial, I need to get certain basics right. Now, I could ask my wife, Marcia, who's a criminal defense lawyer, and judging from this crowd, some of you may be in need of her services. But I want to get the procedures right. And that's not quite as difficult, particularly since I was a trial lawyer, as getting historical facts correct. The foundation in historical fiction has got to be right. And now I'm speaking as if I'm really an expert in historical fiction, because I've written 2 books. And once you have the background correct, now you have freedom. But if you're dealing with real characters, which some historical fiction does and some does not, you're also constrained. I don't want to get emails saying, Einstein wouldn't say that. Now, to a certain extent, some of the dialogue, and not just of those 2, Charles Lindbergh plays a pretty big role in this book. He is not a hero, by the way, as many people know. And I took things he said in a very famous radio address, the Des Moines radio address, in which he attacked Franklin Roosevelt, he attacked the British government, he attacked Jews generally, and trying to keep the United States from aiding Britain against Germany. And I put the actual quotes from that address and from other things into conversation that he has with Chaplin and Einstein. So there are ways of doing it to make it credible, even though it might not have happened in that exact way. In the first chapter, as they're walking into the movie theater that is pictured on the back of the book, there's an exchange, and I'm going to actually now read because I'll never get it right, that actually happened. There's a crowd of 25,000 people that have come to get a glimpse of Charlie Chaplin, who was arguably the most famous man in the world. There was no TikTok, 1937. 25,000 people in the street, and they're craning to get up there, and they're breaking through police crowds. And Einstein says to Chaplin, Charlie, what I admire about your art is its universality. You don't say a word, and yet the world understands you. And Chaplin just immediately fires back at him and goes, Albert, your achievements are greater. The whole world admires you, even though nobody understands a word that you say. And that was sort of they had a lot of banter in their relationship, and I give them a lot of banter. I've been playing tennis also besides the baseball game, and Einstein's a terrible tennis player. Einstein was a really good athlete, a really good tennis player. Einstein keeps hitting the ball long, and looking up at the sky, and Chaplin says to him, Charlie, hit with topspin to keep the ball in. Hit with topspin. And Einstein says, who knew that gravity needed my assistance?
Paul Levine, thank you so
Thank you
much
all.
for talking about tonight.